The same stupid communist idea has been returning to us under a slightly different name, but in a new clothing.
How much unbelievable propaganda gets shoved down our throat in the Western world, or English-speaking world at least.
一开始是为了一小群白人男性的有产者的利益而建立的，宪法是为了保障这个群体的利益而制定的。
Because the Chinese government does in fact want to coerce the rest of the world into believing that what they do is not only okay, but good and righteous.
And the climate crisis is, of course, only a symptom of a much larger crisis. A sustainability crisis, a social crisis, a crisis of inequality that dates back to colonialism and beyond. A crisis based on the idea that some people are worth more than others and therefore have the right to exploit and steal other people's land and resources.
So we know where this is coming from. Anti-fascist, but pro-communist. Communist Party of Germany. Democratic Party of America, Antifa. Just saying.
And it is very naive to believe that we can solve this crisis without confronting the roots of it.
I've seen such a lying, delusional bunch in my entire life. There's been a claim that's been made, which generally has been viewed as hyperbolic over the last couple of years, which is that Democrats are becoming increasingly anti-American. And it's a claim that Democrats have been trying to run away from. But if Democrats are not anti-American, why is there a constant assault on the American flag from Democrat voters and Democrat thought leaders? We're not anti-American, and the next day they're all burning American flags and chopping them into bits, getting triggered, going on MSNBC and saying, I have PTSD after I see American flags on the street. And why is it now that the New York Times started a competition to redesign the American flag, with some of the flag submissions being literal symbols of the, quote, decline of American superiority and a nation that has failed? And better question, how is a political party supposed to thrive? How is a country supposed to thrive with an entire party that thinks the country is irredeemable? How is a country supposed to thrive or survive without basic patriotism for what makes the country great in the first place? These are the questions we are going to try to answer. I gotta show you this campaign from the New York Times. It was absolutely lambasted on Twitter, and this one submission is gonna have you completely flabbergasted. Anyone fond of the American flag's current look may not be thrilled with the new concepts recently published by the New York Times. The American flag is a potent piece of national iconography, but its design shifted frequently until the early 1900s. What if it were redesigned today? We asked artists and graphic designers to try. The flags they came up with reflect a mix of approaches. Some are functional designs, other artistic renderings. Some represent America as it could be. Others how the artists see the country now. The Times wrote in a piece which is labeled as opinion. And now take a look at some of the redesigns. This is what I believe. This was the flag that he submitted.
Interesting, isn't it? So now Microsoft owns America or what? Unfortunately, this is fact. Because Microsoft was doing so well prior to their public offering, they didn't need to rely on the income from the influx of investors and thus didn't need to sell off the wide majority of their stock. Based on Bill Gates' budding friendship with Warren Buffett, it seems that Cascade has adopted much of Buffett's approach to investing, invest in good companies and hold long-term to see healthy returns. In 1999, Cascade Investment made an interesting decision. Gates sold over 7 million of his personal Microsoft shares to diversify his portfolio. The position in Microsoft was quickly funneled by Cascade Investment into his long-term growth strategy. It was near perfect timing too, as 2000 would quickly see the infamous tech crash of .com stocks. While Microsoft took a major hit in the tech crash of 2000, Bill Gates' portfolio with Cascade would gain around 40% return in that same year. So what does this have to do with farmland? Cascade Investment have made some very shrewd decisions and how they allocate the funds from their massive business victory. Gates' critics claim the means by which this supposed technocracy gains power is through implementing band-aid solutions that don't fully understand or respect the context and conditions of the impoverished people they claim to help. Critics claim technocrats use this method of assistance as a means to consolidate power, insufficiently enacting solutions that create reliance on the philanthropist. A small intro into farmland investment. So you may have never heard about farmland before you heard that Bill Gates is buying what sounds like all of it. Farmland is what is known as an alternative asset, an investment that can grow wealth outside of the stock market. There are many budding markets of alternative assets like real estate, fine art, foreign stocks, cryptocurrencies, even NFTs. Where farmland differs from other alt assets is that because it's such a crucial human resource, food equals humans. In less than desirable economic situations, farmland tends to appreciate even further in value, as opposed to losing value. Because of this crucial factor inherent to farmland, it also tends to provide better, consistent returns during times where inflation rises. Another scenario where more traditional assets like stocks and real estate suffering. Also, because you're investing in the land itself, your investment not only is quite resistant to depreciation but also provides some solid tax benefits due to the land ownership. You're not investing in a building that will decay over time, but the rich farmland itself. There's a lot of little benefits that stack up when talking about farmland, but the biggest is probably the fact that farmland returns historically outperforms most other investments vehicles and is also comparatively the least volatile asset among the bunch. Why doesn't everyone just invest in farmland then? Why am I just learning about this now? Well, as with everything in life, there is always a trade-off, especially in finance. Farmland has some natural built-in drawbacks for all of the built-in benefits. Farmland requires a paid tenant, a team of farmers to work the land in order to create revenue. Vacancies can create periods without return. Weather and natural disasters are real risks involving farmland. American farmland produces a lot of exports, and as foreign relations sour, more tariffs on produce can become likely, hurting your return. Farmland has some of the lowest liquidity among assets. You can't just sell off your entire portfolio in a day. It's a little harder to break into farmland than other assets, though this is changing. 20 years ago, it was difficult to invest in farmland if you weren't already independently wealthy. You either had to directly buy the land and buy many acres or entire estates at once, or go through a lot of hassle to functionally create an investment like bond. This takeaway to remember is that a farmland investment is a great hedge to protect portfolios that are heavily invested in the stock market. Another main feature of the big bet is the implementation of the culmination of the Gates Foundation's research, specialized in GMO seeds for different crops that have been gene-edited to be pest-proof, flood-proof, disease-proof, and climate change resistant. Yeah, and are really bad. Partnering with Monsanto to create these super seeds is also part of the plan. And that's exactly the problem. We don't know what the consequences are of GMO seeds. All of this recent farmland accumulation, one might think Gates is using this land to research these gene-edited super seeds. You can find a lot on Monsanto. Here on Last American Vagabond, the complete history of Monsanto, the world's most evil corporation. Of all the megacorps running amok, Monsanto has consistently outperformed its rivals, earning the crown as most evil corporation on earth. Not content to simply rest upon its throne of destruction, it remains focused on newer, more scientifically innovative ways to harm the planet and its people. As true champions of evil, they won't stop until they're stopped. But what is Monsanto, and how did they get to be so obscenely evil in the first place? Monsanto partners with IG Farben, makers of Bayer aspirin and the Third Reich's go-to chemical manufacturer, producing deadly Zyklon B gas during World War II. Together, the companies use their collective expertise to introduce aspartame, another extremely deadly neurotoxin, into the food supply. When questions surface regarding the toxicity of saccharin, Monsanto explains this opportunity to introduce yet another of its deadly poisons onto an unsuspecting public. Coke leads the way once again. Remember saccharin, and begins poisoning Diet Coke drinkers with aspartame in 1983. As expected, sales skyrocketed as millions became hopelessly addicted and sickened by the sweet poison served in a can. The rest of the soft drink industry likes what it seems and quickly follows suit, conveniently forgetting all about their initial reservations that aspartame is a deadly chemical. There's money to be made, lots of it, and that's all that really matters to them anyway. In 1985, undaunted by the swirl of corruption and multiple accusations of fraudulent research undertaken by Searle, Monsanto purchases the company and forms a new aspartame subsidiary, called NutraSweet Company. When multitudes of independent scientists and researchers continue to warn about aspartame toxic effects, Monsanto goes on the offensive, bribing the National Cancer Institute and providing their own fraudulent papers to get the NCA to claim that formaldehyde does not cause cancer, so that aspartame can stay on the market. The known effects of aspartame ingestions are mania, rage, violence, blindness, joint pain, fatigue, weight gain, chest pain, coma, insomnia, numbness, depression, tinnitus, weakness, spasms, irritability, nausea, deafness, memory loss, rashes, dizziness, headaches, seizures, anxiety, palpitations, fainting, cramps, diarrhea, panic, burning in the mouth. Diseases triggered, mimicked include diabetes, MS, lupus, epilepsy, Parkinson's, tumors, miscarriage, infertility, fibromyalgia, infant death, Alzheimer's. Source: US Food and Drug Administration. In 1994, the FDA once again criminally approves Monsanto's latest monstrosity, the synthetic bovine growth hormone, or BGH, produced from a genetically modified E. coli bacteria, despite obvious outrage from the scientific community of its dangers. Of course, Monsanto claims that diseased pus milk full of antibiotics and hormones is not only safe, but actually good for you. Worse yet, dairy companies who refuse to use this toxic cow pus and label their products as BGH-free are sued by Monsanto, claiming it gives them an unfair advantage over competitors. In essence, what Monsanto was saying is, yeah, we know our BGH makes people sick, but it's not alright that you advertise it's not in your products. Unbelievable. The following year, the diabolical company begins producing GMO crops that are tolerant to their toxic herbicide Roundup. Roundup Ready canola oil, rapeseed, soybeans, corn, and Bt cotton begin hitting the market, advertised as being safer, healthier alternatives to their organic non-GMO rivals. Apparently, the propaganda worked, as today over 80% of canola on the market is their GMO variety. A few things you definitely want to avoid in your diet are GMO, soy, corn, wheat, and canola oil, despite the fact that many natural health experts claim the latter to be a healthy oil. It's not, but you'll find it polluting many products on grocery store shelves. Monsanto knows that birds and especially bees throw a wrench into their monopoly due to their ability to pollinate plants, thus naturally creating foods outside of the company's full domination control agenda. When bees attempt to pollinate a GM plant or flower, it gets poisoned and dies. In fact, the bee colony collapse was recognized and has been going on since GM crops were first introduced. To counter the accusations that they deliberately caused this ongoing genocide of bees, Monsanto devilishly buys out Beeologics, the largest bee research firm that was dedicated to studying the colony collapse phenomenon and whose extensive research named the monster as the primary culprit. After that, it's bees. What bees? Everything's just dandy. Again, I did not make this up, but wish I had. As was Monsanto's plan from the beginning, all non-Monsanto crops would be destroyed, forcing farmers the world over to use only its toxic Terminator seeds. And Monsanto made sure farmers who refused to come into the fold were driven out of business or sued when windblown Terminator seeds poisoned organic farms. Terminator seeds are not on the commercial market. Instead, farmers must sign binding agreements that they will not save seeds. This gave the company a virtual monopoly as Terminator seed crops and Roundup worked hand in glove with each other as GMO crops could not survive in a non-chemical environment, so farmers were forced to buy both. At the same time, the monster begins filing patents on breeding techniques for pigs, claiming animals bred any way remotely similar to their patent would grant them ownership. So loose was this patent filing that it became obvious they wanted to claim all pigs bred throughout the world would infringe upon their patent. The global terrorism spreads to India as over 100,000 farmers who are bankrupted by GMO crop failure commit suicide by drinking Roundup, so their families will be eligible for death insurance payments. In response, the monster takes advantage of the situation by alerting the media to a new project to assist small Indian farmers by donating the very things that caused crop failures in the country in the first place. Forbes then names Monsanto Company of the Year. Sickening but true. More troubling is that Whole Foods, the corporation that brands itself as organic, natural and eco-friendly, is proven to be anything but. They refuse to support Proposition 37, California's GMO labeling measure that Monsanto and its GMO brethren eventually helped to defeat. Gates predicts that the next major threat to the global community is much more likely to be a highly infectious virus or bioterrorism instead of a world war. He also drives home the fact that the global community is massively underprepared if a major outbreak were to spread. In 2021, as we know, the outcome of the COVID-19 pandemic has created a slew of new problems felt by everyone. A frustrated, isolated workforce, rising rates of unemployment, small business bankruptcy en masse. Conditions are also circumstances which are known to cause the value of farmland to rise. Bill Gates was planning on profiting from an eventual pandemic.
Time when you do have to give up what you consider your individual right of making your own decision for the greater good of society.
But think about how crazy it is what he just said. There comes a time when you have to give up what you consider your right to make your own choices. What do you mean, I consider? There's no consideration here, Fauci. There's not a debate over this. These are God-given inherent rights. That's always the conversation. So I have a right to make up my own mind. You don't get to say, oh, because society's interests are there, because danger, in fact, those things quite literally do not matter. You know why I can say that? Because that's how it's always been listed in regard to international law. How many times we brought this up? And by the way, this is also listed on U.S. documentation. And this is from the October 19th, 2005 Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights from UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. You know, the UN, of which the United States is a part, right? So here's what it says very clearly. Regardless of what Fauci wants to say, here's the fact in regard to how this applies to you from a world standing. It says the interests and welfare of the individual should have priority over the sole interest of science or society. And then, just as I always point out, under consent, it very clearly says the consent, if you were to have given that, where appropriate, be expressed and may be withdrawn by you, person concerned, at any time or for any reason, without disadvantage or prejudice. Yeah, but who cares about international law? You know, these things don't matter, right? This is what Fauci doesn't care about, right? Now, because society and science, both of which they just told you do not have precedence over you, because of those things, you don't get to make your own choices in some circumstances because society. And that's what good people do. Right? I mean, it's ridiculous. They don't care about anything else that's ever happened before any of this. They're jamming down your throat what they want you to do. It's about narrative versus data. So this is the joke I keep making. These are the people telling you to trust the science while they're seemingly not even looking at the science. See, ignoring it, blatantly going, we'll keep that out of view because that doesn't say what we want it to. But trust the science. What they say when they say trust the science is trust what we're telling you the science is.
Should not be walking around with
with masks. Let me just state for the record that masks are not theater. Wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and masks are protective, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is.
There has not been any indication that putting a mask on and wearing a mask for a considerable period of time has any deleterious effects.
There are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
And can you get some schmutz sort of staying inside there?
Of course.
You do not need to wear a mask indoors if, in fact, you've been vaccinated. Good that you're vaccinated, but in a situation where you have people indoors, particularly crowded, you should wear a mask.
So even if you are vaccinated, you should wear a mask. If, in fact, you are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, you are protected, and you do not need to wear a mask outdoors or indoors. When the children go out into the community, you want them to continue to wear masks.
You know, if you look at children outside, particularly when they're with the family, walking down the street, playing a game or what have you, don't have to wear a mask.
The Academy of Pediatric actually makes that recommendation that children should be wearing masks from 2 years old onward.
And you're asking now, if your child is a member of your household, can you walk outdoors with your child without a mask? According to that chart, the answer is yes.
But the child can't, not to beat it to death.
Yes.
Because now the CDC says, I mean, I think I've got this right. 1 mask is better than 0 masks. 2 masks is better than 1 mask. But you don't have to have double masks. Is that right? I mean,
it became clear that cloth coverings that you didn't have to buy in a store, that you could make yourself, were adequate. And then you wanted to fit better. So one of the ways you could do it, if you would like to, is put a cloth mask over, which actually here and here and here, where you could get leakage in, is much better contained.
Are you a double masker, Dr. Fauci? Look like you are.
Things to understand, and this took me a long time to formulate properly. You know, you hear the terror management theorists, for example, and they have this idea that your meaning representation, the story you tell about the world, regulates your death anxiety. It's something like that. But that's not right. I mean, it's close to right, and it's a smart idea. It came from Ernest Becker, by the way, who wrote a book called The Denial of Death, which is actually quite a good book, even though it's wrong. You know, sometimes a book can be very useful. It can be usefully wrong, and Becker's book is usefully wrong, because he thought that it's the internal representation of your belief system that regulates your anxiety, and that anxiety is fundamentally, in the final analysis, anxiety about death. It's like, well, okay, fine, it's a reasonable proposition, but that isn't how it works, you see. It isn't my beliefs right now that are regulating my emotion. It's the fact that I'm acting out those beliefs, which include implicit perceptions. I'm acting them out, and so are you. And so what you're doing and what I expect, more accurately, what you're doing and what I want you to do, and the way I want you to react to me, that's working. So it's the match between my belief system and the way everyone else is acting that's regulating my emotions. It's not the belief system. It's mediated by the social culture. And you see, if you understand this, then you understand more particularly why people are willing to fight to the bitter end to protect their culture. It's not a psychological structure that they're protecting. It's a psychological structure and a sociological structure simultaneously. So the social contract is, you have a set of expectations and I have a set of expectations. They're actually desires. They're not merely expectations, because as living creatures, we're desirous. We don't just expect. And so you desire an outcome and I desire an outcome. And we agree to act in accordance with that. That's the social contract.
Ex-racism.
And standing in solidarity with not just the straight black community, but all black and brown lives, to show that when one of us is under attack, that we all have to stand up and fight back.
So people don't like having that disrupted.
The problem was being pushed into solidarity. You have to know what solidarity actually means. If you don't agree with the idea, then you are excluded. Socialism and her ugly sister communism show us the distortion of the principle of solidarity, while unrestrained capitalism shows us the distortion of the principle of subsidiarity. It is interesting to note that these two economic systems invariably produce a culture that matches the economic theory. A socialist system will produce a top-heavy bureaucratic government-led tyranny that suppresses the little guy. In such a system, subservience to the state is exalted, and the only virtue that remains is patriotism. Meanwhile, a capitalistic system will produce a culture of complete and total individual freedom, where self-interest is exalted and the only virtue that remains is tolerance. Solidarity and subsidiarity. The state understands its mission to solidarity according to the principle of subsidiarity, namely, that it wishes to express the full sovereignty of nation. In other words, to be authentic solidarity, the union of people in a shared cause and shared concern for one another must begin at the lowest level possible. The grassroots movement gather steam and accomplish their cause. Great ideas, 5-year plans, bureaucratic solutions are top-heavy and invariably fail. With this in mind, all government organizations should seek to serve the grassroots, but in our present society it is the other way around. Increasingly the grassroots are expected to serve the bureaucracy, the elite ruling class. Solidarity is the simple concept that no man is an island and we are our brother's keeper. This corrects a tendency towards extreme individualism and the tyranny of individual rights, which is anarchy. The principle of subsidiarity is that problems are best solved and initiatives most effectively taken at the lowest level of society possible. In other words, top-down bureaucratic solutions are not an expression of solidarity. They are an expression of tyranny, okay? It's a socialist idea, okay? And it suffocates individual needs. You are excluded.
Well, it isn't because it psychologically destabilizes them, although it does. It's because it actually destabilizes them, right? If all of a sudden we can't occupy the same specified domain of territory, it isn't only that we're thrown into psychological disarray, although we will be. It's that we'll start fighting with each other, and that can kill you. It's no joke. It kills people a lot. It can happen very easily that a cohesive social group can fragment along some fracture line of identity, let's say, and all hell breaks loose. You know, that's what happened with the Tutsis and the Hutu in Rwanda, you know, and those things can get out of control just so fast. It's just unbelievable.
Well, I've said it before and I will say it again, it's got a real good ring to it. The United States of Texas, or the United States of Florida, whatever you want to call it. It started off as a meme that I would just post on my Twitter account, people would like it, and have a good laugh. But the divide, the fracturing between both political sides has reached maybe beyond a point of redemption. Now, I generally like to stay relatively optimistic, but I really don't know anymore. How can the two current political sides mesh together? It started off as political differences, but it's become hate. It's become violent. It's become vitriol. It's become toxic, and I don't know how you step back from that. How do you fix it? How do you fix and mend the unfixable or the unmendable? Some diseases just don't have cures. And what if the cure is secession? What if the cure is just divorce? Splitting up. You go your way, we go our way. Go your own ways, make your own path. Let the socialists create the United States of Venezuela.
And the lie has, in fact, led us so far away from a normal society that you cannot even orient yourself any longer In its dense, grey fog, not even one pillar can be seen. Lying has always been used for political purposes. Lies cover up corruption, past mistakes, and hidden motives, and they are an essential ingredient in political campaigning. Sometimes, however, political lies take on a much more sinister form. The lies become all-encompassing, embrace all aspects of life, and infect every corner of society. This occurrence is a sign that totalitarianism may be rising, for as the political philosopher Hannah Arendt noted, totalitarianism, at its essence, is an attempt at transforming reality into fiction. It is the attempt of corrupt and pathological state actors to impose a fictional account of the world onto the entire population. In Nazi Germany, it was the idea of a superior race and an unclean people that formed the big lie. In the Soviet Union, it was the belief that state communism could work and that all could be made equal. And from the big lie trickled down a stream of endless little lies. Referring to communist Russia, Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote, "In our country, the lie has become not just a moral category, but a pillar of the state." Describing Czechoslovakia under Soviet rule, Václav Havel similarly explained, "Life in the system is so thoroughly permeated with hypocrisy and lies. Because the regime is captive to its own lies, it must falsify everything. It falsifies the past, it falsifies the present, and it falsifies the future. It falsifies statistics."
And then we have the other side. Edward Bernays and propaganda. The name propaganda applied in modern political language as a term of reproach to secret associations for the spread of opinions and principles which are viewed by most governments with horror and aversion. People keep asking, how could it ever come to the Holocaust? How was that possible? Well, propaganda. Joseph Goebbels actually read Edward Bernays' books. They came out way before World War II, so Goebbels had enough time to think about this. And the logo they used, the so-called Hakenkreuz, which is the swastika, it was part of their propaganda. They used symbolism. So here is the swastika, the eagle, and on the floor, capitalism, liberalism, Hitler forging the sword. Very symbolic. And here, those are parties, I think, burning in the fire. So there is the one-party rule. Again, propaganda. It says enough. Again, the swastika. And vote for Hitler. He will be the liberator and the symbolism of strength.
The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. This passage was written by Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and a pioneering mind behind advertising, modern propaganda, and the field of public relations. Bernays' influence was enormous. Relying heavily on the insights of his uncle, he developed highly successful manipulation techniques which are still used today, not only by companies to sell consumer products, but also by the powers that be to, in the words of Bernays, control and regiment the masses. Bernays' most intriguing ideas, paying particular attention to his insights on how group psychology can be used to control and manipulate the masses. In his classic work, Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego, Sigmund Freud described group psychology as being concerned with the individual man as a member of a race, of a nation, of a caste, of a profession, of an institution, or as a component part of a crowd of people who have been organized into a group at some particular time for some definite purpose. In other words, group psychology attempts to understand how an individual's behavior, thoughts, and emotions change when becoming a part of a group. The tendency of human beings to form groups was selected for in our evolutionary past due to the survival benefits it offered. Ancient humans who organized into tribes were more likely to survive and reproduce in the harsh environments in which they lived. However, with the help of modern technologies, humans today have transformed the environment in a manner which renders the survival value of tribal organization obsolete. But with that said, the ancient and instinctual pull of tribal organization still looms large in the lives of most, with many people today identifying and hence stereotyping both themselves and others based on things such as race, class, gender, nationality, religion, or the political party or ideology to which one adheres. This continued proclivity to engage in group identification is, according to Bernays, a function of the enlarged sense of self-importance that individuals derive from identifying with a potentially powerful mass. Just as the wolf pack is many times as strong as the combined strength of its individual members, so too the individual senses the potential power of the group, and it derives feelings of potency in identifying with it. Beginning in the late 19th century, a number of thinkers, most notably Freud and Gustave Le Bon, attempted to understand why people engage in group identification, and how group identification affects one's mind and behavior. As Bernays noted, the insights that emerged from this study caught the attention of those in positions of power who wanted to expand their control of societies. These people saw the potential of taking the theoretical insights of group psychology and transforming them into practical methods that could be used to manipulate the masses from outside of the public's eye.
A campaign to improve public health through vaccination, sanitary cooking, or the placement of spittoons was or is no less a propaganda drive than any anti-clerical or socialist or nativist crusade. Far from denoting lies, half-truths, selective history, or any of the other tricks that we associate with propaganda now, that word meant at first the total opposite of such deceptions. Of the sheep now wretchedly straying the world over, Gregory wrote, especially it is to be desired that, inspired by divine grace, they should cease to wander amidst heresies through the unhappy pastures of infidelity, drinking deadly and poisonous water, but be placed in the pasture of true faith, that they may be gathered together in saving doctrine, and be led to the springs of the waters of life. Freud had revolutionized the way the world thought about individual behavior, so Bernays was able to transform attitudes toward group action. He used his uncle's ideas in the commercial realm to predict, then adjust, the way people believed and behaved. Never mind that they didn't realize it. In fact, all the better. And just as Freud was rewarded with the title Father of Psychoanalysis, so Bernays became known around the world as the father of public relations. The techniques he developed fast became staples of political campaigns and of image-making in general. Bernays' papers offer insight into more than just the profession of public relations. However, they also provide illuminating and sometimes disturbing background on some of the most interesting episodes of 20th century history, from the way American tobacco tycoons made it socially acceptable for women to smoke, to the way other titans of industry persuaded us to pave over our landscape and switch to beer as the beverage of moderation. The companies involved aren't likely to release their records of those campaigns, assuming they still exist. But Bernays saved every scrap of paper he sent out or took in, and provided for them to be made public after his death. In so doing, he let us see just how policies were made and how, in many cases, they were founded on deception.
The political system rests upon a bed of lies. What can be done to turn the tide back towards truth and freedom?
We already saw that there are very powerful forces who are interested in strengthening the restrictions, in continuing various lockdowns, and in this respect, I think we can imagine what will go on.
So, I mean, if somebody would have said 8 months ago that they can lock down the whole economy, you would have laughed.
Probably, but now it's already the history. We already lived for 8 months in a more or less crazy world, and then in this respect, one thing goes after another, rather in a quasi-rational process. So I am afraid that we are not at the end of the story. We can imagine very easily that the governments all over the world will go on and introduce new measures which will be devastating to the economy and to the atmosphere in societies.
So would you say that the new normal, that's the beginning of the new normal already, or how could you...
I know the term new normal, suggesting that there will never be the old normal. Yeah. That's probably true. We have shifted the society somehow, and we are at a new level. Okay, to call it new normal is one potential terminology to be used.
So what is it? Does it lead to a full nationalization of the economy at the end of the day, when government are interfering?
Well, I don't think that nationalization is the story. At least definitely not the nationalization in the old style, on the old form. I don't think that the governments will nationalize the economy as it was done 70 years ago in my Czechoslovakia at the time. It's sufficient to radically increase restrictions, prohibitions, necessary conditions, sub-conditions, standards, and that's the new form of nationalizing the economy.
Yeah, I mean, all those measures at the end of the day, when you look at social distancing, self-quarantine, governments decide certain businesses are essential, others are not essential.
Well, yes, you mentioned the term social distancing, yeah, which is a really new formulation. We in the communist era, we understood the logic of the communist system, and the logic was to practically liquidate as much as possible horizontal relations. Everything has to be done from one place to the top and back to low. So the vertical relations were the only sort of allowed, not horizontal relations. And this is the way how we describe communism and the structure of communist society. And now the whole idea of social distancing is another form of breaking the horizontal relations relations among people. And this is the way to fragmentation of society, to atomization of society. And I think this is one of the main issues not sufficiently discussed in our societies these days. The communist system really wanted to separate us. It was not called social distancing, but practically it was the same idea and the same logic, not to let us go together to talk and potentially to prepare a revolution to destroy communism. So the idea was to keep us separate as much as possible, and that's the substance of the system, of the communist system or of any totalitarian system, and we are really dangerously approaching a new totality.
I think it's much more about fear and control than
fear and control, and to distribute fear is also a very successful instrument how to suppress people.
Yeah. And when you look at social distancing, so human interaction becomes a medical problem.
Yeah.
It's a medical threat, a health threat. I mean, this is, as you said, it's really destroying society as such.
Social distancing, or to put it in another terminology, to eliminate the interplay of free citizens. That's really the issue of the day. And this is what we feel very strongly. We feel it very strongly because of our oversensitivity, which was the result of the communist experience, something which the people in Switzerland, in the United States, didn't have.
So you're saying it's basically a war against Western civilization. It's a war against the achievements of enlightenment, meaning free speech, capitalism as a markets, it's free markets, private property, family, and also the belief system. As in Christianity, self-responsibility, and man is born free.
Exactly. And we see that the same stupid communist idea has been returning to us under a slightly different name. And we see that the same stupid communist idea has been returning to us under a slightly different name, but in a new clothing. Tragic. This is something that I would say I 30 years ago, in the moment of our Velvet Revolution, of the fall of communism, this is something I must say I didn't expect.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn published a short essay titled "Live Not by Lies," and in it he wrote, "We are approaching the brink. Already a universal spiritual demise is upon us. A physical one is about to flare up and engulf us and our children, while we continue to smile sheepishly and babble. But what can we do to stop it? We haven't the strength. But we can do everything, even if we comfort and lie to ourselves that this is not so. It is not they who are guilty of everything, but we ourselves, only we." When a state turns totalitarian, the individuals who live in these societies are not merely its victims. All the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century rose to power amidst thunderous applause, as many citizens openly called for the brutal control that defines this form of rule. Without mass support and compliance, the minority in the ruling class would be but paper tigers. The responsibility for the oppression, suffering, and loss of life that comes in the wake of totalitarianism, therefore, cannot be placed exclusively on politicians and bureaucrats. A large portion of responsibility must be placed on the citizens who support this form of rule, or else do nothing to resist. Václav Havel explains in his book, The Power of the Powerless. There is obviously something in human beings which responds to this totalitarian system. Human beings are compelled to live within a lie, but they can be compelled to do so only because they are in fact capable of living in this way. Therefore, not only does the system alienate humanity, but at the same time, alienated humanity supports this system as its own involuntary master plan, as a degenerate image of its own degeneration, as a record of people's own failure as individuals. If the fuel for the growth of totalitarianism is weak and fearful individuals, then a cure is a personal revolution that takes place in hearts and minds and leads to an awakening of self-responsibility, courage, and strength. The best resistance to totalitarianism is simply to drive it out of our own souls, our own circumstances, our own land, to drive it out of contemporary humankind. Alexander Solzhenitsyn's writings played a major role in toppling the communist Soviet Empire, and he advised we engage in such a personal revolution by transforming our life in a way which targets the most vulnerable part of the totalitarian system, the lies upon which it is built. In Live Not by Lies, Solzhenitsyn explains, and therein we find, neglected by us, the simplest, the most accessible key to our liberation, a personal non-participation in lies. Even if all is covered by lies, even if all is under their rule, let us resist in the smallest way. Let their rule hold, not through me.
And let the freedom-minded, open-market conservatives create their own little world. Well, it started off as a meme, and it seems as though it's becoming reality. As Texans are growing more and more fond of secession, Texas House members have been pushing petitions and pushing legislation, a couple months ago pushing towards a vote on whether or not to secede. And now we have polling data that it seems as though both sides of the political aisle are really opening up to the idea of seceding. Take a look at this headline right over here. It says it all. More than half of Trump voters would like to secede from the Union, while most Americans believe we're no longer a democracy. Mediaite reported on the poll from Virginia. Significant numbers of both Trump and Biden voters show a willingness to consider violating democratic tendencies and norms, if needed to serve their priorities. Roughly 2 in 10 Trump and Biden voters strongly agree it would be better if a president could take needed actions without being constrained by Congress or courts. And roughly 4 in 10, 41% of Biden, and half, 52% of Trump voters, at least somewhat agree that it is time to split the country, favoring blue/red states seceding from the Union. On one hand, roughly 80% of Trump and Biden voters view democracy as preferable to any non-democratic kind of government. And while these numbers are, of course, not unanimous to say the least on both sides, what's startling is just the increase. Every single year, every single month, it gets worse and worse and worse. The numbers climb and climb and climb as more people are realizing that the current political divide is going to be very hard to heal. And it has been my prediction for months that this is the direction of the current political dynamic. If you think about it, let's focus specifically on the 2020 election. Think about that dynamic. You had tens of millions of Americans who completely lost faith and lost trust in the democratic process. Then you had the other side of the country, as well as the media, social media companies, telling them you're crazy, ostracizing them from society, and having no willingness whatsoever to look into the claims and look into the issue. How is that possibly going to make things better? Imagine being on the side that's losing faith and the other side is saying, well, too bad, tough luck. You're a crazy nutjob and into the asylum you go. You think that's just going to magically make things better? Or is that going to further exacerbate the issue, cause further division, further distrust? Gun manufacturer Smith & Wesson is moving headquarters from Massachusetts to Tennessee. You live with a tax on your freedoms and your rights. Freedom to live, freedom to partake in society, freedom to earn a living, freedom of speech, the right to bear arms and protect yourself and your family. And then on top of all of that, it has trickle-down effects where business leaves. Is it no surprise that more manufacturers, more tech companies, more massive corporations are leaving California and Portland, Washington, Chicago, Massachusetts, and they all near unanimously seem to be heading towards red states with less red tape, with lower taxes and higher freedom index, where people can partake in society and consume products and pay for services, go to restaurants, go to ball games, live their lives without permission from the government or without unbearable restrictions that make the business not profitable. People say it's temporary. Democrats are saving lives while Republicans seem careless or have no compassion when it comes to the loss of life. No, that has nothing to do with it. It's an equation. It's called a balancing. Loss of life is never good. Everyone can agree with that. It's about balancing protection of those lives with protection of basic human rights and constitutional rights. You say it's temporary emergency orders and temporary powers to government. But when, I ask you, when in the history of human nature. Has government taken power temporarily and then given it back? When government takes, it keeps. And if you haven't paid attention to that yet, then your eyes are closed and your ears are blocked. If you think for half a second Democrat governors, leaders, mayors, etc. plan on giving back the powers that they have taken, you are out of your damn mind. This is terrible. All of it. And it really is. It's just absolutely terrible the way this next generation, specifically the liberal side, is so dead-eye focused on this concept of systemic racism. When they look at the flag, it's all they see, and they have been trained. Their minds have been warped to think that. It's literally the opposite of what the American flag stands for. I mean, we're talking about the early 1900s when the final design was created. Were there little pockets of hate throughout the country? Absolutely. You'll find that in literally any country. But what it was meant to stand for was a new beginning. Equal rights, freedom, democracy. And you know what? It's lived up to that name, I'd say, quite well. This absolutely twisted view that America hasn't lived up to its standard is just so absolutely despicable. Find another country on the planet that's accomplished anything close. You'll be hard-pressed because it doesn't exist. There is no place on planet Earth that has created and offered the American dream for so many different people of so many different backgrounds. Liberals are so funny talking about the utopia that is Europe, Northern European countries, as being so much better. Generally, they're referring to places like Sweden and Norway, Denmark, Germany, places like that, places that have been essentially ethno-states until like 2015, until the Syrian refugee crisis. These are places that had almost net zero immigration, small countries where everybody was of the same race, and they're referring to those places as even coming close to the diversity and true melting pot that is the American system. It's not even close. There is no competition. The American flag doesn't need a redesign. Democrat brains need to be rewired. Washington University students seen throwing away thousands of American flags for 9/11. New York Times and MSNBC Mara Gray, by the way, New York Times, the same outlet that started this competition to redesign the American flag, says that she finds it, quote, disturbing to see dozens of American flags on trucks in Long Island. We covered this from not too long ago after 13 U.S. service members lost their lives. 13 American flags were placed on an overpass in California, which were swiftly vandalized by, of course, leftists. We've seen over the last 4 years Antifa across the country burning American flags, which has, of course, seemingly become the favored pastime of leftist activists. But this wasn't the case. This is a shift change in culture. This is what the education system is doing to young minds. When I'm talking about rewiring the mind, I know it's possible because it's been done in opposite fashion. Democrats are claiming that they're pushing for progression and moving forward to a, quote, brighter future, but all they have done is create more division in society and elevate a new generation of Americans who absolutely despise everything the country stands for. I mean, if we're talking about demoralization, where it was claimed that it takes multiple decades to happen, that is exactly what's happening in the academic system from start to finish. That's why people have issues with CRT. This constant focus on everything negative, this constant division, this constant push that America is some deeply irredeemable, evil, racist place is not only ahistorical, but it's ripping the country apart. Let's put things into perspective once again like we always do. Let's do a little bit of a flashback. The media has become so anti-American, pushing Marxist ideals, social Marxism, cultural Marxism. I mean, at the DNC, for Pete's sakes, the American flag was upside down. That's happened in a very short period of time. In the early 2000s, right after 9/11, there was a wave of total patriotism within the entertainment industry. I was trying to find a good example of this, and I ended up digging up some Disney commercials from back in the day, which went a little something like this.
The flag means everything to me. It means life, it means freedom, it also means unity, and it means love. You see American flags everywhere, and it reminds you, but it also makes you really proud. I spent my whole life pledging allegiance, and I don't think I can ever look at a flag the same way.
The flag stands for us as a group of people being united and being with each other in a time of need.
I saw a fire truck pass by the other day, and it had an American flag on it, and it was blowing in the wind. It was so amazing. Everyone just started clapping and cheering, and it was really special.
So Disney used to promote American patriotism. Now, well, Disney's pushing something else. Let's just leave it at that. The curriculum has changed in the entertainment industry, in culture, and in academia. A generation of unhinged, anti-American, unpatriotic youth that are ripping the fabric of society apart. This is how you destroy a nation. You know, it's kind of interesting, a little bit ironic. If we go back to the flag submission from Na Kim, the colors of our flag are intended to stand for unity, valor, justice, etc. The gray monochrome flag represents America surrendering to its fall from power and the loss of its ideals that it once stood for, the American dream, is being washed away. You know what, to a certain extent it kind of is, slowly, but the flag that you present here, and the ideology that you stand for, is the culprit behind it. They're claiming America is dead as they suck the life out of the nation themselves. And it's getting to a point where the division has become so deep-seated, so filled with hate, that it's no surprise that the idea of secession becomes more and more popular. How do the people who still believe in the American dream, the American process, America as a social experiment in general, stand aside Democrats who desecrate the American flag and everything it stands for? Candace Owens released this absolutely beyond base tweet just the other day. I wonder if we're moving past the point of reconciliation with the left. Maybe we'd all be better letting them pick a few states they could turn into their own country with no guns, no police, no statues, no genders, no flags, no men, and no electricity. The United Freaks of America. And it's starting to get to a point where I think a lot of people feel that way. And you know what? I don't necessarily blame you. The left has become so divisive, so hateful, so anti-American. It's not hyperbole, it's fact, that they have become impossible to live with. It seems as though the end of the woke era is all but inevitable. The amount of woke backlash over the last couple of months has been completely incredible this time. It's next level. You know, it's kind of interesting. We have far lefty, anti-corporation, Marxist liberals who use corporations to try to enact some sort of social change. A little bit paradoxical to say the least. But it was only a matter of time before these corporations realized that a couple of loud voices on Twitter don't necessarily represent the American electorate or the values of a country, anything but. And so what do you think's happening? Well, it's exactly what we've predicted for years. These corporations are realizing that they gotta protect their bottom line at all costs, and that's exactly what they're doing. And if that cost means abandoning the woke agenda, they're gonna do it. That's exactly what they're doing. Coca-Cola getting behind the Georgia boycotts because a couple woke activists on Twitter called them out for their, quote, silence about a totally logical voter integrity bill that was passed in the state. And all of a sudden backtracking, and now Coca-Cola just put a pause on their diversity plan, aka diversity quotas, after remember the backlash that they received a couple months ago for having a seminar that told employees working for their company to try to be less white. Intersectionality, woke lefty Twitter politics ruins absolutely everything it touches, and so of course the inevitable collapse. Told you guys, Biden can't bring two pieces of bread together to make a damn sandwich. LeBron James is supposed to be the leader of a generation, all the young kids looking up to him. All he's done is sow more hate and division in society. All he's done is pit racial groups against each other. I mean, just last week, the internet was a storm over one of his tweets. He spoke about the Biden administration's new initiative to counter or to investigate what they view as domestic extremism, which is, of course, a catch-all phrase to demonize Republicans, to demonize people who were present on January 6th, and the official number is 85 million taxpayer dollars are going to be spent on investigating and spying on Americans to combat the extremism on the right side of politics as left-wingers burn down cities and storm capitals with near impunity. And so that was the first illiberal, liberal authoritarian move of the Biden administration for this week. Now we have another as Jen Psaki shows up in front of the American press, in front of the American people, and applauds the censorship of the former president of the United States of America. These people do not uphold the Constitution. They do not uphold what makes America great. They do not uphold what has allowed Western civilization to thrive over the last century. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of government dissent of popular orthodoxies, and it should be condemned unilaterally. The fact that liberals applaud this type of stuff as if it's a political victory is so completely pathetic. I find myself constantly defending the rights of speech of people I disagree with. For instance, Destiny got banned on Twitch a couple days ago, and even though I pretty much never use Twitter, I felt something, an urge, where I had to say something. One thing that I know is true is that lefties do not extend the same courtesy of protecting the sacred First Amendment, protecting free speech and the ability to express yourself when it comes to conservatives. In fact, they love it. They seem to relish in the idea that big corporations stifle the voices of Americans. I mean, just think about that. Cheering on straight up corporate authoritarianism. And now, of course, I mean, what else do you expect from Jen Psaki? It's coming from the White House. Now we've exposed her, we've highlighted exactly how disingenuous she is. And of course, liberals pretend as if that's not the case. But here's the thing. Jen Psaki just admitted that her job is essentially to be disingenuous, and that the entire idea that the White House has right now when it comes to interacting with the White House press corps is deliberately not satisfying their questions, deliberately avoiding hard truths, and keeping keeping things shielded in secret. Check this out.
We're never going to satisfy the White House press corps and their desires for access. And I think there have been mistakes made in the past of trying to do that. If you do a press conference, every other week or once a week, that doesn't satisfy them. They're going to push for more. That's their job. What we've tried to do, which has also been maddening, I know, for the press corps at times, is kind of not get pulled in by distraction. He likes the press corps and likes that back and forth and that engagement. But what we've tried to do in general, and thinking about how we use his time, is really think about what the public cares about, right? The public cares about the pandemic, the economy.
And so she specifically said there that her job is to lie to the press pool, or at least omit the truth, which is lying by omission. And that's specifically because she's solely focused on what the American people want. Well, Jen Psaki, might be a newsflash to you. The American people want one thing, and that's transparency, and that's honesty. That's for you to tell the truth. That's for you to update them on what's really going on. She said previous administrations had failed with this. What you mean is, the Trump administration actually told the truth? But that was a mistake. The Trump administration was too transparent, and so the Biden admin came in and changed that, bringing back the status quo.
Once one succumbs to the effects of group identification, such critical introspection becomes nearly impossible. A group is extraordinarily credulous and open to influence, wrote Freud. It has no critical faculty. In identifying with a group, the individual subordinates self-analysis and a discerning search for the truth in favor of maintaining group interests and cohesion. And with their critical capacities weakened by the influence of group psychology, they become highly susceptible to psychological operations designed to target suppressed or unconscious desires and emotions. In the modern day, there appears to be forces operating through the mainstream media and popular culture which are attempting to increase the individual's proclivity to engage in certain types of group identification, namely, identifications that divide the population into conflicting groups. This phenomenon has potentially dire consequences for both the stability and freedom of a society, as it allows those in power to institute the age-old tactic of divide and conquer. In his book, Discourses on Livy, Machiavelli noted that those who have held power over a population have long realized that a population united is always stronger than those who rule over it, and thus stretching back into ancient times, rulers have sought to divide the many, and weaken the force which was strong while it was united, through the use of those methods which promote division. By dividing a population along lines such as race, class, religion, gender, or political preference, or in other words, into groups naturally prone to clash, the effects of group psychology render rational discourse and debate between individuals in these separate groups extremely unlikely. Each group, Bernays wrote, considers its own standards ultimate and indisputable, and tends to dismiss all contrary or different standards as indefensible. Unable to settle differences in opinions via rational discourse, groups whose belief structures clash tend to revert to more destructive means in their attempt to defeat those they perceive as a threat. A society dominated by such groups is thus easily divided in increasingly hostile conflict, and as a result, not only does the population as a whole become weakened, as Machiavelli pointed out, but its eyes are diverted away from the actions of those operating behind the scenes, who constitute, in the words of Bernays, the invisible government who controls the destinies of millions.
Inflation, the downside of a hot economy. If you haven't felt it yet, it's coming. You can expect higher prices for toilet paper, diapers, soft drinks, plane tickets, a tank full of gas. Whirlpool is raising prices of some of its appliances by up to 12%. Inflation, the downside of a hot economy. The downside of a hot economy.
If you haven't felt it yet, it's coming. Literally, the video that I recorded before this was the hyperinflation that no one's talking about.
Today, we've seen this massive outage, just in case maybe you're not watching this show right now. It's very interesting to me. Now, we're going to follow up on what's really going on here, but I just wanted to point this out. Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp experience global outages, but apparently we're seeing ticks in a lot of locations, including Twitter, AT&T, T-Mobile, all of this. I'm very interested by this. As always, when this happens, I go, what did they just change, right? What just happened? When YouTube has a massive outage, I'm thinking, okay, what deepfakes were just added, right? What manipulations just took place, right? What Castro-style edits of pictures and videos just happened to rewrite history in real time, right? They absolutely have done these things in the past. So I'm asking what happened now. Now, I don't know. We'll follow up. But could this just be a test in general to see who responds and in what way? Could it be a test to see if it could be turned off in a certain way? I mean, these are all things we should be asking. The idea of the switch of turning off the internet has been a growing conversation in supposedly, dystopian third world countries, even though it's just as likely to happen right here in the same exact circumstance, but it's a conversation. So we should be asking whether or not your government is playing a part in what's happening here. Just a thought, just asking a general question.
I am Michael Shermer, the director of the Skeptic Society, the publisher of Skeptic Magazine. We investigate claims of the paranormal, pseudoscience, and fringe groups and cults and claims of all kinds between. Science and pseudoscience and non-science, junk science, voodoo science, pathological science, bad science, non-science, and plain old nonsense. There's a lot of that out there. Some people call us debunkers, which is kind of a negative term, but let's face it, there's a lot of bunk. The theme is expressed nicely here in the Sidney Harris cartoon. For those of you in the back, it says here, then a miracle occurs. I think you need to be more explicit here in step 2. This single slide completely dismantles the intelligent design arguments. There's nothing more to it than that. Another example of this was auditory illusions. There's this film White Noise with Michael Keaton about the dead talking back to us. By the way, this whole business of talking to the dead, it's not that big a deal. Anybody can do it. Turns out it's getting the dead to talk back. That's the really hard part. In this case, supposedly these messages are hidden in electronic phenomena. There's a reversespeech.com webpage in which I downloaded this stuff. Here is the forward. This is the most famous one of all of these. Here's the forward version of the very famous song.
If there's a button in your hedgerow, don't be alarmed now. It's just a sprinkling for the maiden queen. Yes, there are 2 paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on.
Boy, can you just listen to that all day? All right, here it is backwards, and see if you can hear the hidden messages that are supposedly in there.
It's my sweet all of it upside would make me laugh with now and safe. You can throw me new chicks and sticks. And all of you want some more shade. You need to stop my sleep.
You can't miss it when I tell you what's there.